back, everyone. I'm again filming here from my apartment in Queens, New York, and we're continuing our 5-day-a-week broadcasts Monday through Friday on the coronavirus, the CCP virus. And we're going to start today with something interesting. President Trump has put the funding for the WHO, the World Health Organization, on hold until an investigation is completed. Now, you may remember, of course, we've been talking about the WHO quite a bit on this show. The WHO has been parroting the lines of the Chinese Communist Party.
First, there is no reason for measures that unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade. So, WHO doesn't recommend limiting transfer or trade and movement.
Anything the Chinese Communist Party says as far as its numbers, the number of dead, there's no human-to-human transmission, as we remember it said early on. Everything it has said all along the way, the WHO has been repeating, it misled the world, and its misleading of the world led many countries to be unprepared.
In many ways, China is actually setting a new standard for outbreak.
So an investigation is now underway, and during that time, the Trump administration will not be financing the WHO.
Today I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus.
And he also said, quote, WHO put political correctness above life-saving measures. And he noted that it pushed the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's misinformation about the virus. And he noted that countries that listened to the WHO's information kept their borders open with China, which again accelerated the spread of this virus. And in addition to this, the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee also announced that it will launch an investigation into the origin of this virus, the CCP virus, and the response of it, which will include looking into the WHO. Meanwhile, the Washington Post is reporting that there were State Department cables back in 2018 warning about this P4 laboratory in Wuhan, that the protocols there, that the safety there, that things in place to prevent a virus from escaping were not adequate. It reports that, quote, U.S. Embassy officials visited a Chinese research facility in the city of Wuhan several times and sent 2 official warnings back to Washington about inadequate security at the lab, which was conducting risky studies on coronaviruses from bats. The cables have fueled discussion inside the U.S. government about whether this or another Wuhan lab was at the source of the virus, even though conclusive proof has yet to emerge. Interesting to see what will come of this, especially given that the Trump administration now has announced that they'll be investigating the WHO, and the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee will be looking into the origin of this virus. We'll see what comes out of this. Now, meanwhile, we've been hearing a lot of interesting things going on with these Chinese tech companies operating in the United States and abroad. And Huawei is again in the headlines. Ren Zhengfei has stepped down as director of Shanghai Huawei. Now, the Epoch Times tried looking into this new CEO, a Tian Xiangpu, and we couldn't find anything on him. This is a very mysterious individual who has replaced Ren. And of course, there's mixed information on why Ren stepped down, nothing really official coming out. Now, there have been ongoing issues with Huawei, going back to the Obama administration, but continuing up until very recently, when on February 13th, the Justice Department filed an indictment charging Huawei and its subsidiaries with racketeering, conspiracy to steal trade secrets, and for conducting business in North Korea and Iran to help these governments with domestic surveillance. Who knows what else will come out of this, we'll have to see. But this is something broader, it seems. I'll go over some of the other things. This comes as the United States is investigating China Telecom. and looking into all Chinese companies tied to U.S. telecommunications infrastructure, as we mentioned in a recent episode. This also comes right after Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba Group Holdings Ltd., stepped down, and there are rumors that he was removed. It also comes after several large Chinese companies, such as Ruxing Coffee, were exposed running Ponzi schemes and other schemes. This coffee company was a publicly traded company here in the U.S. They looked into its finances and found that it was lying about its profits. And there are others as well. Zoom, for example, being sued. This chat program online that everyone was using, it turned out it was routing data through Chinese networks. And of course it's being sued as well. So something interesting is happening with all these big Chinese companies. You know, as an investigative reporter, there's two things I usually look for. One is patterns, and two is trajectory. And so you look for anomalies, you look for things that seem out of place, and then you see if it's part of a larger pattern. There's been a very interesting pattern of these big Chinese tech companies, major companies on the global stage, having pretty serious shifts, charges, indictments, and the charges across the board seem to be aligning very clearly. The U.S. government is investigating these companies. We do know the Justice Department is looking into, say, these different companies involved with economic theft against the United States, particularly Chinese companies. Bigger picture, too, we've seen 5 different Chinese state-run media get listed as foreign missions of the Chinese Communist Party, including China Daily, which publishes China Watch, which goes into around 30 U.S. publications, including New York Times, Washington Post, some of the big names. This comes as doctors like this professor, this Dr. Charles Lieber at Harvard University, was charged for being involved, getting paid by the Chinese Communist Party's Thousand Talents program. There's something big going on when it comes to rooting out Chinese influence here in the United States. This is going to be something that hits the business community, the academic community, possibly even the political circles. Of course, my own research since 2008, so 12 years now, one of my main focuses as an investigative reporter has been looking into the Chinese Communist Party's systems of subversion, its overseas operations mainly under the United Front Work Department. And of course, the stuff I've uncovered with that has been pretty serious. The number of people who could be charged with this is pretty serious. If the U.S. government so chooses to, say, go all the way with it. Meanwhile, on the note of Huawei and these Chinese telecom companies, British intelligence is saying the UK needs to re-evaluate its relationships with China. It says it needs stricter control of high-tech and other industries. In other words, the UK government needs to have stricter control over these things. And Huawei sent an open letter calling on the UK to not change its partnership on 5G with Huawei, saying it will cause them harm. And notably, you may remember too, France is going under a similar issue with Huawei. As a bit of context to this, Britain had agreed to implement Huawei's 5G. The UK is now looking to move away from that. And as part of the Chinese Communist Party's mask diplomacy programs, where they're using medical equipment, basically holding the world's medical equipment, ransom, in France, they've made it so that part of the agreement to get this medical equipment is to install Huawei 5G. And so the Chinese Communist Party has some interest in pushing these things abroad right now, and there's a lot of pushback against it. Now, something interesting as well, pretty horrifying. There was a story in Apple Daily, it's a Hong Kong pseudo-independent newspaper, mostly independent. It had a story that was pretty serious and appears to have been pulled offline. I'll be looking into this more. But the story talked about a man in China who was found to have violated his adopted daughter. But the investigations into this found a human trafficking ring in China, and they found even the pricings, the cost of individuals. Now it says you can buy a human fetus for 40,000 yuan, you can buy an infant for 100,000 yuan, according to these investigators. Unfortunately, the article appears to have disappeared. I did not make an archive of it. I'm going to find out if anyone did, but I will still include the link to that article in the description of this post, this YouTube page. The sources in each episode, there's too many to list, so we include them in a Google Doc. You can all go there. If anyone can find the original source of this, please let me know. If anyone can find an archive of this Apple Daily post, please let me know. I'll also be looking for it. Now, moving on to this Dr. Ai Fen. You may remember in China when this pandemic was first emerging, there were about 8 doctors that tried warning people about the virus. 8 doctors, some of whom were arrested, all of whom were pressured in some way by the Chinese Communist Party to keep their mouths shut. They tried warning the world about it and they were silenced. One of the original doctors who tried warning the world, a whistleblower, was Dr. Ai Fen. She disappeared shortly after trying to warn the world, and now she has reappeared in a very strange video where she appears to be talking to her cell phone in front of the hospital. Now, she was the head of the emergency ward at the Central Hospital in Wuhan. There's different talk about whether this is real in China right now among Chinese netizens. Some think it might not be her. She is wearing a face mask. Some think that she may be pressured, that this is something she's being forced to do. You can see in the video that she's blinking rapidly. It does appear odd, and her story seems to be very oddly fully in line with, the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda right now, claiming that everything is, sunny and happy in Wuhan, which it's not, is it? Anyone's followed the show knows. And on that note, Hubei province is allegedly back on lockdown. There are notices released online to resume prevention measures. Here's a quote from one of those documents translated from Chinese by Jennifer Zheng, who's with our sister media NTD. It says, quote, "Urgent lockdown notice. All communities immediately resume the previous disease prevention and control measures. Set up inspection points at all major roads of all villages and towns." Something happening. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party has been talking about second wave outbreaks. As anyone who's followed this show knows, it very likely never ended in the first place. But regardless, it does appear, at least if these 2 documents appearing online are correct, and there are some photos as well, showing what appear to be lockdowns. We've also had reports of residential compounds already having been locked down in Wuhan, particularly. Something's happening. Now, you may remember I published a video from an independent journalist in Brazil, Alando Santos with Terce Livre, and it showed videos of the Brazilian police allegedly busting some operation. An individual Chinese national who apparently was pretty influential in local politics and also had a lot of connections to China. There were weapons found, pretty serious-looking firearms. Allegedly, he had slaves working for him there, and he was stealing medical equipment. He had stolen medical equipment. There's new information on this. The man's name is Xiao Yun, or Marcos Zheng. He was arrested on suspicion that he led a gang that stole 15,000 coronavirus test kits and 2 million pieces of protective gear, this PPE we keep hearing about. He was the chair of the Shanghai Association in Brazil. And that to me is a smoking gun. It fits in with my analysis last time, and I'll go over that again in just a bit. Now, apparently this individual had mediated meetings of Chinese bankers and businessmen in Brazil. He was not a minor figure. He also had connections with high-level politicians, and he had other deals having to do with the Brazilian government and with China. Now, the firearms appear to have been from his 2 armed bodyguards. It's coming out now. One is a military policeman, and the other is a sergeant in the Brazilian Army Reserve. He's also denying the charges, but the police there are saying they caught him red-handed, stealing these goods. Now again, my research going back to 2008 as an investigative reporter at the Epoch Times, one of my main focuses was the United Front Work Department. The United Front Work Department is a branch of the Chinese Communist Party that looks to expand the influence, the control of the Chinese Communist Party into overseas communities. One of the main things it targets are the Tongs, the fraternal organizations, hometown associations like the Shandong Association, like the Shanghai Association in Brazil. In New York, for example, one of the main organizations I investigated was the Fujian American Association, beneath which just so happens to operate the Fuqing Gang, some of the largest human traffickers in the world, drug traffickers, you name it. It just so happens, too, that the Fujian American Association is one of the closest organizations in New York to the Chinese consulate and to the Chinese Communist Party. Visiting officials from China often work with them very closely. Now, long story short, when it comes to these associations, not all of them are bad. This actually goes back to traditional Chinese society, where, under the dynasty system, there was really no government below the county level. Beneath the county level, you had, say, a bottom-up form of government. Guilds, tongs, family name associations, hometown associations, and these things. When they immigrated abroad, they maintained those same bottom-up structures, which is why Chinatowns are so insulated. They're so hard to understand. These are the unofficial governing bodies of Chinatowns. And so when the Chinese Communist Party wanted to extend its influence abroad, it targets these associations. When it gains control of them, it gains control of hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of members, depending on whether you believe their numbers or not. And each of them targets different areas of society. Some of them have pretty high-level influence. Some are industry-focused, such as oil worker tongs, police tongs, business tongs, student tongs, you name it. Now, moving on to some news from outside of China. First off, Russia. Now, CNN has a story, take it for what you will. Putin allegedly appears more serious now than he did before when addressing this virus. You have to remember, first, Russia didn't really seem to be taking this that seriously. Things seem to have changed now. There were reports that this coronavirus is now infecting individuals in the Russian military, and there is also a report from the Moscow opposition warning mayors as coronavirus slams the economy that there will be, quote, mass starvation. Who knows the real situation in Russia? That was, of course, the Moscow Times saying that. We'll have to see. Meanwhile, 100 politicians and experts, pretty prominent folks, matter of fact, from around the world, have released an open letter condemning the Chinese Communist Party not just for its cover-up and handling of this virus, but also for its human rights abuses, and they've come out and supported the different Chinese dissidents and citizen journalists who have stood up against the Chinese Communist Party. Now, it states, after listing several journalists and individuals in China who've tried warning the world about what's happening, and it says, just to name a few of the real heroes and martyrs who risk their life and liberty for a free and open China. Their individual voices are already forming a chorus. They demand nothing less than a critical evaluation of the impact of CCP policies, Chinese Communist Party policies, on the lives of Chinese citizens and citizens around the world. We urge you to join them. And the letter states, quote, the global pandemic forces us all to confront an inconvenient truth. By politicizing all aspects of life, including people's health, continued autocratic one-party rule in the People's Republic of China has endangered everyone. Rather than trusting the CCP's intentions and accepting establishment academics' uncritical approval of the party state's policies, we should pay greater attention to the voices of what can be termed unofficial China. These independent-minded academics, doctors, entrepreneurs, citizen journalists, public interest lawyers, and young students no longer accept the CCP's rule by fear. Neither should you. Pretty interesting words coming, and also co-signed by some pretty big names, politicians and academics, heads of different think tanks, you name it. Check it out. It's going to be in the description. Again, with all the other links, they're too long to fit in the description itself, so we have a Google Doc link in the description if you want to read the whole letter. Also, there's reports now that in New York, about 1 out of every 100 New Yorkers has tested positive for this virus. There's about 195,031 cases. This is according to the Washington Post. In Greece, they have rallied their forces, put them on high alert, the military, because there are intelligence reports, allegedly in Greece, they're saying, showing that Turkish authorities may be sending asylum seekers infected with the virus. And this may be pretty serious. You may remember in the United States, we talked about it on the show, 2 individuals in the U.S. were charged with terrorism for allegedly trying to spread this virus here, on grounds that this virus is a biological agent. So maybe this is a new form of terrorism. It's unclear what the intelligence report that Greece says it has from Turkish authorities says, whether they're knowingly and intentionally using this as a bioterror move, or if it's something to alleviate their own pressure of facing this virus in their own country. Again, we'll have to see. Now, with that said, folks, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. We really need your support. We've also had some reports, people saying that they've been unsubscribed by YouTube. And so if you have already subscribed, double check and make sure you're still subscribed. And of course, really appreciate your support. If you have questions for me, things you want to tell me, leave them in the comments section. I do read the comments, and every Monday I'll be going over a few of them on the show. With that said, folks, of course, we're going to be broadcasting Monday through Friday, so please tune in. And we're covering for now this coronavirus, the CCP virus. So thanks again. See you next time.